There is a smell that almost every human being on Earth recognizes instantly. You cannot buy it in a bottle, not really. You cannot summon it on demand. But the moment it arrives, you know exactly what it is. It rises up from the ground in the first minutes of rain after a long dry spell, a rich, earthy, almost sweet scent that seems to fill the whole world. And when you smell it, something happens in you. You feel calm. You feel good. Some deep, wordless part of you responds to it as though it matters enormously. And here is the strange thing. That response is not random. That feeling is ancient. And the reason you have it may reach back millions of years into the story of how your ancestors survived. The smell has a name. It is called petrichor. And the science of where it comes from, why it exists, and why your brain is so exquisitely tuned to detect it is one of the most beautiful and overlooked stories in all of human biology. Because you are not just smelling wet dirt. You are detecting a chemical signal that your ancestors may have depended on to stay alive. And your love of that smell may be one of the oldest inheritances you carry. Let us begin with the smell itself. Where does it actually come from? For a long time, no one really knew. It seems to come from the rain, but rain itself is just water, and water is odorless. So the smell is not coming from the rain. It is coming from what the rain touches. And in 1964, two Australian researchers named Isabel Joy Baer and Richard Thomas set out to solve the mystery. They were the ones who gave the phenomenon its name, petrichor. They built the word from two Greek roots, petra, meaning stone, and ichor, which in Greek mythology was the ethereal fluid that flowed in the veins of the gods, the blood of the gods in the stone. It is a strangely poetic name for the smell of wet earth, and once you understand what actually causes it, the poetry starts to feel earned. Baer and Thomas discovered that during dry periods, certain plants secrete oils, and these oils accumulate in the soil and on rocks over time. When rain finally falls, it interacts with these accumulated oils and releases them into the air, along with other compounds. But the oils are only part of the story, because there is a second ingredient, and this one is the real star of the show. It comes not from plants, but from bacteria living in the soil beneath your feet. And this is where the story becomes genuinely remarkable. In the soil, almost everywhere on Earth, there live enormous populations of bacteria called actinobacteria. And one group of these, in particular, produces a compound with a name you should remember, geosmin. The word literally means earth smell. Geosmin is the molecule most responsible for that rich, earthy scent you notice after rain. These soil bacteria produce it constantly as they grow, and especially as they prepare to reproduce by releasing spores. When the soil is dry, the geosmin sits there, locked in place. But when raindrops strike the dry ground, something extraordinary happens, and it was captured in astonishing detail by researchers at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Using high-speed cameras, scientists at MIT filmed what happens in the fraction of a second when a single raindrop hits dry, porous soil, and what they saw was almost magical. When the drop lands, it traps tiny bubbles of air beneath it. Those bubbles shoot upward through the droplet and burst out of the top, launching a fine spray of microscopic particles into the air, like the fizz released when you open a bottle of champagne. This spray is called an aerosol, and these aerosols carry with them the geosmin and the plant oils and everything else that was resting in the soil. A single raindrop can release hundreds of these scent-carrying particles. And when rain begins to fall across a whole landscape, billions of these tiny bursts launch the smell of the earth up into the air all at once, where the wind carries it and where your nose is waiting. So that is the mechanism. Dry soil full of bacterial geosmin and plant oils is struck by rain, which flings microscopic scent particles into the air for you to breathe. But this only deepens the real mystery, because it explains where the smell comes from. It does not explain why you love it. Why does this particular smell, out of all the smells in the world, produce such a powerful and pleasant response in human beings? Why does the smell of wet earth feel good? And here is the first astonishing fact. Human beings are extraordinarily, almost unbelievably sensitive to geosmin. Our noses can detect it at concentrations as low as a few parts per trillion. To put that in perspective, that is like being able to detect a single drop of a substance diluted into an amount of water large enough to fill dozens of Olympic swimming pools. There are very few things in the entire world that the human nose is more sensitive to than geosmin. We are better at detecting the smell of wet earth than sharks are at detecting blood in water. Think about that. Evolution does not tune a sense to that level of sensitivity by accident. When a species becomes exquisitely, extraordinarily good at detecting a specific molecule, it is almost always because detecting that molecule mattered enormously for survival. So the question becomes, why would the smell of soil bacteria matter so much to the survival of a human being? And the leading answer is as simple as it is profound: water. For almost the entire history of our species, and the species that came before us, finding water was the single most important survival task there was. You can survive weeks without food. You can survive only days without water. For your ancestors, wandering across ancient landscapes, often in dry and unpredictable environments, the ability to locate water was quite literally the difference between life and death. And here is the key insight. Geosmin, the smell of rain on Earth, is a signal of water. It is a signal that rain has fallen or is falling nearby. It is a signal that the dry landscape has been refreshed, that plants may grow, that animals may gather, that the desperate search for water may be over. An ancestor who could detect that smell from a great distance, carried on the wind, and who felt drawn toward it would have had an enormous survival advantage over one who could not. This is the leading theory for why humans love the smell of rain. Not because the smell is inherently pleasant in some abstract way, but because over millions of years, the individuals who were most sensitive to it and who found it most compelling were the ones most likely to find water, and therefore most likely to survive and pass on their genes. The pleasure you feel is not really about the smell. It is a reward, ancient and deep, for detecting the signal of life-giving water. Your ancestors who loved that smell lived. Your ancestors who were indifferent to it were less likely to. And you are the descendant of the ones who loved it. But the story goes even deeper, and it involves a genuinely surprising partnership between humans and the very bacteria that make the smell. Recent research has suggested something remarkable about why these soil bacteria produce geosmin in the first place. Remember that the bacteria release geosmin especially when they are producing spores, the tiny packages they use to reproduce and spread to new locations. A team of researchers investigating this found evidence that geosmin may function as a signal to attract certain small creatures, particularly tiny arthropods called springtails, which are drawn to the smell, feed on the bacteria, and then carry the bacterial spores away on their bodies to colonize new ground. In other words, the smell may be an advertisement. The bacteria produce a scent that attracts creatures, and those creatures spread the bacteria. It is a partnership, an ancient arrangement between a bacterium and the animals that answer its call. And here is the beautiful implication. Human beings may simply be another creature that answers that call, on a much larger scale. The bacteria produce a smell that means water and life and growth. Springtails are drawn to it. And human beings, over millions of years, may have been drawn to it too, pulled across the landscape toward the promise of rain and water and survival. We are, in a sense, participants in one of the oldest scent-based relationships on Earth, tuned by evolution to respond to a signal first produced by microscopic organisms in the soil. Now, it is important to be honest about the science here, because this is a field where firm evidence and reasonable theory blend together. The chemistry of petrichor and geosmin is well established. Our extraordinary sensitivity to geosmin is well established and genuinely remarkable. The idea that this sensitivity evolved because geosmin signals water is a compelling and widely discussed hypothesis. But like many claims about the deep evolutionary origins of human behavior, it is difficult to prove definitively. We cannot run the experiment of rewinding evolution. What we can say is that the pieces fit together with striking elegance. We are exceptionally sensitive to a molecule that signals water. Water was essential to our survival, and we find the smell deeply pleasant. Whether or not every detail of the theory is correct, the pattern is hard to ignore. And this connects to something much larger about the kind of creature you are. There is a concept in biology, developed and popularized by the biologist Edward O. Wilson, called biophilia. It is the idea that human beings have an innate, evolved tendency to seek connection with nature and other forms of life. Wilson argued that because our ancestors evolved over millions of years in intimate contact with the natural world, Our minds and bodies are deeply shaped by that world in ways we rarely notice. We are drawn to certain landscapes. We are calmed by certain natural sounds. We feel restored in the presence of trees and water and open sky. And our response to the smell of rain may be one of the purest examples of biophilia there is. It is a piece of ancient nature wired directly into your emotional response. A reminder that you are not separate from the natural world, but a product of it, still carrying its signals inside you. Think about what this means for the everyday moment when you step outside after a summer storm and breathe in. That feeling of freshness, of calm, of something almost like relief. You might think of it as a simple, pleasant sensation, a nice smell and nothing more. But it is not nothing more. It is a moment of deep connection to your own evolutionary past. In that breath, you are running a program written into your species over countless generations. You are detecting at almost impossibly low concentrations a molecule produced by bacteria in the soil, a molecule that has meant water and life to your ancestors for longer than there have been human beings to smell it. And the pleasure you feel is the ancient reward your brain gives you for noticing. There is something almost humbling in this. We tend to think of ourselves as separate from nature, as creatures of cities and screens and climate control, far removed from the ancient dramas of survival. But the smell of rain cuts straight through all of that. It reaches past your conscious mind, past your modern life, and touches something far older. It is a reminder that no matter how far we travel from the world that made us, we still carry that world inside us. That the same signal that guided a thirsty ancestor across a dry landscape 100,000 years ago still reaches you today, in a garden, on a sidewalk, through an open window, and still, quietly, makes you feel good. So the next time the rain begins to fall after a long, dry stretch, and that rich, earthy, unmistakable smell rises up to meet you, pause for just a moment. Understand what you are actually experiencing. You are smelling the blood of the gods in the stone, as two researchers poetically named it. You are detecting the chemical whisper of bacteria in the earth. You are answering a call that has been sounding for millions of years. And you are feeling, in that quiet moment of pleasure, the deep and living connection between you and the ancient world that shaped you. It is one of the smallest, most ordinary experiences in human life. And it is also one of the most profound. A tiny miracle, released one raindrop at a time. If this changed how you think about the smell of rain, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment below and tell me which part surprised you most. And if you want more of this, subscribe to Simply Odd. A new video drops every week. The next one might explain something you have wondered about your whole life without ever knowing what to ask.